Hello everybody and welcome back to the Public Sector Sales Podcast. My name is James and today we're joined by Richard Brown of the Competition and Markets Authority to talk about everything related to anti-competitive procurement activities. As a supplier or hopeful supplier in the UK public sector, it's key that you understand what anti-competitive procurement activity looks like, how you can avoid it and what the consequences are if you don't. That's why we partnered with Richard and the CMA today to learn all about it and how you can avoid it. Richard, thank you for being with us today. For the benefit of our listeners who may be unaware, what is it that the Competition and Markets Authority does?
Competition and Markets Authority is really the UK's primary competition watchdog. So we have a real interest in looking at the economy and taking action to ensure that it can grow properly, it can prosper, and that there is really, for both individuals and for businesses, that it is working properly, by which I mean for individuals that they get as fair a choice and as wide a choice and a fairer deal as possible, whilst businesses can compete fairly on a level playing field, and also that helps innovation and in total that all helps with the prosperity, the growth and the general fairness of the economy.
So digging into that a bit more, close to our listeners' hearts, obviously, is procurement, public procurement.
Of course.
Our listeners are wanting to breach into the public sector, do business with government. What is it that the CMA does specifically relating to public procurement? What is it that you investigate and try to enforce?
Well, we have an enforcement directorate, and within that sits cartels cases, and we have a number of investigations, or we have had a number of investigations in relation to public procurement cases, in particular around bid rigging, where businesses have not competed properly. They've got together, made agreements in a way to skew things in their favour for what they want rather than what the customer may want. And of course, when we're looking at public procurement, that's a very, very big sector. Billions are spent every year on it. And so that is a very important concern for us when looking at competition and fair competition generally.
So, having done a bit of research into bid rigging and based off the work we've previously done together, bid rigging takes a few different forms, I believe. There's cover pricing and bid suppression. Could you sort of, on a high level, what are the different types of bid rigging? What kind of formats do they take?
Well, as you said, there's cover pricing, which is really one we see a lot, but there's a couple of others, and they all interact to some degree potentially in a case. So you have cover bidding, there's bid suppression, and then there's also a form of bid rotation as well. So the first of those, cover bidding, which is, as I said, one we see a lot, that is where one company has decided that it doesn't want to win a contract, doesn't want to win the tender. And so it gets together and approaches its so-called competitors and says, we don't want to win this. But the other company, another company says, we do. And so the companies that don't want to win put in what's called a cover bid. They put in an inflated bid, often in agreement with the other company, or they make their bid less attractive in some way. So that's general cover bidding. But it can be done as part of a wider sort of agreement, in that there may be bid suppression. They may be saying, well, actually, we're not even going to submit a bid on this occasion. And then you may also just have where there's bid rotation, where someone looks. Quite often you have this situation where there's a homogenous product or service. There's quite a closed group of businesses who are always bidding. They have the opportunity to talk to each other, and they come up with a plan saying, this time it'll be your turn to win this tender. We know there's another tender coming out in relation to another big project soon. It'll be your turn next time. And it goes round and round like that way.
Putting that in a bit of context, I know that recently the CMA fined a number of construction firms who are accused of anti-competitive procurement practices. Could you explain a bit more about that case, what happened there?
That was in the demolition sector, and it was 10 companies and involving 19 contracts actually across private sector, but also public sector as well. And that was very much to do with cover bidding. And again, we saw evidence there. Often it's texts and emails, the companies contacting each other saying, what about this job that's coming up? I'm paraphrasing here. What should we be putting? We don't want this. How much should we put in for our tender? Because we want to give a cover bid. Or someone else contacting another person saying, can you please give a cover bid for us? We want it. So that's the sort of general trend we had there. And the amounts that involved were millions, 19 contracts, as I said, and of those 19 contracts, a number of them, for 5 of the companies, involved something called compensation payments. And that's a situation where, particularly where there's this sort of bid rotation or sort of quid pro quo arrangement where they say, well, we're going to win this, we're going to try and win this, but we will have, as a result of that, we will give you some kickback or some sort of payment. And it could be direct cash payment, or it could be next job will be yours. So the amounts involved in those compensation payments, in some cases, were very significant. We're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Are there any other sectors, any other case studies that you've come across?
Certainly, I mean, 2 immediately spring to mind. Again, it's in the construction sort of sector, and that is a sector which seems to be we do investigate and come back to quite regularly. But there was a case in concrete pipes. May not sound like the most exciting of products, but actually, when you think about it, vital industry. I mean, I used to cycle down to my local train station, and there would be all these concrete pipes being put into a big project going on there, and it's in roadworks, motorways being redeveloped. And in that situation, we had 3 big companies, and they would get together over a period of years in hotel rooms away from normal businesses. They would make sure some occasions the hotel rooms were not marked up with their names, and they would discuss what prices they were going to charge, which customers each were going to get, and what their overall market shares were going to be. We actually recorded 4 of those meetings, and you could see them comparing their price lists, discussing where the agreement had actually fallen down, and that gave us a lot of evidence. But the impact of that, again, very significant, millions of pounds fines for these businesses. And a feature of both this and the other case I mentioned was that we, and we're increasingly doing this, director disqualification. So senior managers or directors involved or didn't stop the conduct, they are liable to be disqualified from being directors. And in both cases, we have had director disqualifications.
Not to put both sectors into a bad light, but I picked up that you said there were a number of cases in both sectors where anti-competitive practices had been going on. Do you think is there a reason why you think that sector is particularly susceptible to those kind of practices?
I think it might, again, you're quite right. I don't want to say everyone is out, far from it, but it does seem to be that we have had a number of investigations in, let's say, the last six years or so. And it might be a historical reason for it, that it's taken time for particular industries to understand that practices such as cover bidding just aren't lawful. But also going back to sort of basic premise about cover bidding, that it's that situation where you have an established group of suppliers, they all know each other, and they're all generally often bidding for the same work. That creates the opportunity, and it might be that there are some parts of that industry which lend itself to that situation, to that sort of temptation.
That makes sense. Yeah, don't want to put the sector in a bad light.
Exactly. No. And most, I must stress, most do want to do the right thing.
Yeah, of course. So what are the consequences for the public sector, for the government, for the public purse as a result of these kind of practices?
Well, really, so the billions that are spent every year on public sector procurement, and if this practice is going on, and we see it going on, even a small percentage of it occurring in just a very small number of cases, the chances of prices increasing because of this conduct are significant, and they can go up. We understand by a significant amount. But even if it's a small percentage, bear in mind the base rate, the amounts being spent, it can have a real consequence on ultimately the taxpayer, the millions that are being wasted because of it.
Of course. Why is it, do you think, to go from that from the government's perspective to the supplier's perspective, why do suppliers tend to turn to activities like bid rigging or anti-competitive practices? Do you think, is it always an intentional activity they're doing, or is it they're more maybe unaware of what the regulations and what sort of best practice looks like?
I think poor leadership is a reason why it may happen, where you have directors, senior managers who should know better, not looking out for it or stopping it, or actually being actively involved in it themselves. Yes, there may be occasions where perhaps more junior members of staff aren't aware of the law, but most companies do have active compliance policies around competition. And increasingly, the position of the law, it is now very well established. And I think there are occasions perhaps where you have poor economic conditions. So we've got the backdrop of cost of living crisis at the moment, that is a temptation because people think, well, I need to protect my profits, and maybe this is a way to try and do so, a sort of a quick, easy fit in those sort of circumstances.
So touching on that, I suppose some suppliers may think they're being quite business savvy, or they're being sort of, like you said, they're looking at alternate ways to do business. What is that distinction between anti-competitive behaviour, as we've described, and actual proper competition? Where does that sort of distinction actually lie?
I mean, I think CMA, Competition Markets Authority, we're very pro lawful collaboration. We understand there are occasions when there needs to be lawful collaboration that may help innovation and some projects, but that is very different to exchange of pricing information, to exchange of commercially sensitive information, with the whole aim that the customer doesn't know about it. And that really is a red line for us, because that has the direct consequences upon the customer, but also upon general economy as well. It stops other businesses getting into the market as well.
So touching on the consequences for suppliers who do engage in bid rigging or anti-competitive practices, what are the consequences for suppliers if they're caught doing those kind of things?
They are, I think, very serious. I mean, the headline figure is we can fine them up to 10% of their worldwide turnover. There's also consequences for individuals, as I touched on before, about directors and senior managers, that they can be disqualified from being directors for up to 15 years. But there's also a reputational hit. There are future chances of being debarred from public sector work. That's an increasing risk for companies. And also there's follow-on damages. So when we publish a decision, the actual victims, the customers who have been hit by this conduct, can actually bring private damages, including the government, public sector can as well now.
And what would your advice then be for suppliers on how to better educate, sort of instill proper competitive practices in their work when they're bidding on public sector work, for example?
Again, I think for suppliers, it's really very much about educating their staff and making sure they've got proper compliance policies in place. We do see the use of, when with tenders coming in they have to sign non-collusion certificates. I think that should be a standard practice and that's perhaps more on the side of the procurers themselves to make sure they're there. But it should be something that is very much in the forefront of the boardrooms. They're thinking about health and safety. They should also be thinking about this sort of compliance. So
what should suppliers do if they suspect that other suppliers they're working with, or even themselves, may have engaged in bid rigging or anti-competitive practices?
Obviously it's a difficult thing for someone to realise, to find out when they find that out, what to do. But there is a wealth of information on our website, and we have a dedicated page all about cheating or competing, it's called. But the headline is that if a company finds out that it is engaged in this sort of conduct, the first thing it should do is actually get legal advice. But there is also, if we don't have an investigation already in place, they're the first to come in and they cooperate fully with us, that the potential then is for that company to get full immunity from any fines, and also for the individuals to get immunity from director disqualification. In addition, the individuals can do that as well. If they've been involved, they can come forward as well and potentially receive that immunity if they're the first in and we don't know about it. Even if they're not the first in, though, a business can actually, under our leniency program, still come in, admit their conduct, cooperate fully, and receive a reduction in their penalties as well.
So touching on that, what would you say to individuals who may not be directly involved in anti-competitive practices but know of it happening in another organisation, for example? What would you say to them?
Well, that's very important for us to know. And we do actually, again, it's all on our cheating and competing webpage, but there is ways and means that individuals can come forward to us and let us know what's going on. And that's through, we've got a Cartels hotline, we've got an email address, web page to submit, and actually it's seen as a very important strand for us when looking at cases and seeing what might be there for us to investigate. And recently, the importance of that, I think, has been shown by we've increased a potential reward for people who do come forward with information that is of use. And there is the reward level's gone up recently from, I think it's from £100,000 to £250,000. So that won't obviously be available to all, but it is, I think, is significant, and it shows how important such sources of information are to us. I should just add in relation to that if individuals do come forward, they can do that anonymously through all those sources. But if not, we do have a dedicated team who will look after them, talk them through the process, discuss with them issues such as protection of their identity, and really it's very much a specialist team who are dedicated to this sort of work. So finally, on the whole, why is it that businesses should care about compliance? What is it that it does for the industry, for the private sector as a whole, sort of reputation-wise, when they put themselves in position and stand against these kind of practices? I think, there's the immediate consequence, reduces their risk of getting in fines, but perhaps wider is that if they are actively engaged in this compliance policies and putting themselves out there as being aware of this and actually actively trying to stop it happening amongst their staff, then that comes across to their customers. And the customers see that this is a business that takes its role seriously. And if it's doing that on compliance, then it's going to be a responsible, trustworthy supplier overall. And I think that has a wider consequence for the economy, or that sector in particular, because actually it means the company will be looking at, well, I'm not going to try and take a shortcut. I'm not going to try and get together with my fellow so-called competitors, try and stitch up my customers. What I'm going to try and do is try and win this fairly. And now that may be through pricing, or it may be through more efficient terms of the tender, such as program length, but it might be also by innovation. And that can only be good for that sector, and as I said, the economy as a whole. Excellent. I believe that is all we have time for today. Thank you for joining me today, Richard. Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Public Sector Sales Podcast. If you want to listen to more of our episodes, you can watch and listen to them over on our YouTube channel. If you want to access all of our reports and analysis into the UK public sector marketplace, you can just head over to our website. And if you want to learn more about how our platform can help you do more business with government, head over to our Book a Demo page on tussle.com. Catch you next time.